Have you ever walked through a cemetery and felt like something was wrong? Because today, we're going into Tartarian giant cemeteries, why some old tombstones are too large for ordinary people. Not a little stone with a name. I'm talking about markers that look like mini buildings, 2 to 4 meters tall. Bases so thick, they look like they were made to hold a machine, not a memory. Some of them weigh 1 to 4 tons, sitting over a single grave like it's guarding something. And here's where it gets scary. It's not just one cemetery. You find the same oversized stones in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany. Same shapes, same cuts, even the same strange details, perfect drilled holes, metal stains, grooves like something was bolted on and later ripped away. Then you see the old photos. Workers standing next to these monuments, and the stones tower over them. And in some pictures, the top part is there, and in later prints, it's gone, like someone didn't just remove it. They removed it from the record. So what were these really built for? Were they just rich family graves? Or were they bases for something we're not supposed to remember? Because if these stones were never meant to honor the dead, then the real question is simple. What exactly was hidden in plain sight? And why did it get erased? Dusk in a small cemetery outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The kind of place where grass grows long between the rows and the iron fence hasn't been painted since the Reagan years. Most visitors walk past the old section without stopping. The stones there are weathered. Hard to read, easy to ignore, but one marker won't let you ignore it. It stands nearly 3 meters tall. The base alone measures 40 centimeters thick, solid granite, cut with a precision that feels almost surgical. The weight, according to a local stonemason who examined it in 2019, sits somewhere between 2 and 3 tons. For one grave, one name, one death. The inscription reads simply, James Whitmore, 1847 to 1891. No title, no verse, no explanation for why a 44-year-old man with no recorded fortune, no political office, no military rank needed a monument that could anchor a bridge. Have you ever walked through a cemetery and felt like something was wrong? Because today we're going into Tartarian giant cemeteries, why some old tombstones are too large for ordinary people. Not a little stone with a name. I'm talking about markers that look like mini buildings, 2 to 4 meters tall, bases so thick they feel built to hold a device, not a memory. Some weigh 1 to 4 tons, sitting over a single grave like it's guarding something. And here's where it turns. It's not just one cemetery. You find the same oversized stones in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany. Same shapes, same cuts. Even the same strange details, perfect drilled holes, metal stains, grooves like something was bolted on and later ripped away. Then you see the old photos. Workers standing next to these monuments, and the stones tower over them. And in some pictures, the top piece is there then in later prints. It's gone. Like someone didn't just remove it. Like someone removed it from the record. So what were these really built for? Were they just rich family graves? Or were they bases for something we're not supposed to remember? Because if these stones were never meant to honor the dead, then the real question is simple. What exactly was hidden in plain sight, and why did it get erased? If you're the kind of person who notices what others walk past, hit subscribe, because this channel is built for you. Now, let's go back to that cemetery in Pennsylvania. The first thing you notice about the Whitmore stone isn't the height, it's the base. Cemetery markers from the 1890s follow patterns. You can still find catalogs from that era. Sears sold gravestones by mail order. The designs are ornate but practical. A base of 8 to 12 inches, a vertical slab, maybe an urn on top, or a draped cloth carved in relief. The Whitmore stone follows none of these rules. Its base is a solid rectangular block, nearly 1 meter on each side. The top surface where the vertical monument rises shows 4 perfectly circular depressions, each roughly 5 centimeters in diameter. Arranged in a square, the spacing between them measures exactly 31 centimeters. Not close, not about, exactly. A decorative choice does not need that kind of repeatable precision, but a mounting point does. The vertical portion of the monument rises another 2 meters above the base. It tapers slightly toward the top, and at the apex, there is a flat platform, roughly 20 by 20 centimeters, with a single threaded hole in the center. The hole is empty now. Whatever it once held is gone. Cemetery records from Allegheny County list James Whitmore as a laborer. No wife recorded, no children, no estate filed in probate court. A laborer in 1891 earned roughly $400 per year. A monument of this size, according to period stone-cutting price lists, would have cost between $600 and $1,000 more than 2 years of wages. Someone paid for this. But it wasn't James Whitmore, and the records don't say who. The first question forms slowly, the way fog settles over headstones at dusk. Who was this really built for? A dead laborer? Or something that needed to stand exactly here, at exactly this height, facing exactly east-northeast? The cemetery office has no answers. The county archive shows a gap in the ledger for that year. Pages 114 through 119 are missing, cut cleanly from the binding. Whoever removed them knew what they were doing. One oversized monument could be an eccentric family's grief, a wealthy uncle, a secret benefactor. Things like that happen. But James Whitmore's stone is not alone. Walk 50 meters north, past the newer section, past the mausoleums built in the 1920s, and you'll find a row that doesn't appear on any official cemetery map. 17 stones, all oversized, all facing the same direction, all showing the same strange features: drilled holes, metal staining, and flat mounting surfaces where something once stood. 17 stones that look less like graves and more like the remains of a machine that was shut down and left behind. 17 stones in a row that doesn't exist on any map. The cemetery groundskeeper, a man named Harold who's worked here since 1987, calls it the old industrial section. When you ask why, he just shrugs, says it's always been called that, says his predecessor called it that too. But there's nothing industrial about a graveyard, unless what's buried here was never meant to be a grave. The row sits at the northern edge of the property, cut off from the main cemetery by a shallow drainage ditch that fills with rainwater every spring. No paved path leads to it. No sign marks the entrance. The grass grows wilder here, and the trees, old oaks planted sometime in the 1870s, form a canopy so thick that even at noon, the light feels gray. The first stone in the row belongs to a woman named Eleanor Marsh, died 1883. The monument stands 2.5 meters tall. The base shows the same features as the Whitmore stone: 4 circular depressions, evenly spaced, arranged in a perfect square. The second stone, Thomas Garrett, died 1879. Same design, same depressions, same flat mounting platform at the top, with a threaded hole that no longer holds anything. The third, the fourth, the fifth, all of them identical in structure. Different names, different dates, but the same build, the same purpose-driven shape, the same cold feeling of engineering hiding inside a memorial. Cemetery monuments from this era came from catalogs. Families chose a design, picked the stone, and paid a carver to add the inscription. The process was standardized, efficient, predictable, but catalog monuments don't come with mounting hardware. They don't come with bolt patterns, and they don't come with surfaces machined so flat and so exact that they feel measured. Not carved precision you expect in a workshop, not a cemetery. Yet here, in a forgotten row of a forgotten graveyard in western Pennsylvania, 17 monuments share those same features, as if they were ordered from a different catalog entirely, one that was never meant for grieving families. A local historian named Patricia Vance spent 3 years researching this section. Her findings, published in a 2014 article for a regional heritage journal, raise more questions than they answer. According to Vance, none of the 17 individuals buried here appear in the 1880 census for Allegheny County. No birth records, no marriage licenses, no property deeds. The names exist only on the stones themselves, and in a single cemetery ledger that lists each burial with the same note: paid in full, no family contact. 17 people, no families, no histories, no paper trail, and monuments that cost more than most workers earned in 2 years. Vance's conclusion was careful, restrained, and almost too polite for what it implies. The evidence suggests these markers were installed by an institution rather than by individual families. The uniformity of design and the absence of biographical records point to a coordinated effort, though the nature and purpose of that effort remains unclear. She submitted a follow-up proposal to scan the site using ground-penetrating radar. The County Historical Commission rejected it. No reason given. The rejection letter, dated November 2015, runs exactly one sentence: "Your request has been reviewed and denied." Patricia Vance retired the following year. She no longer responds to inquiries about the project. Stand at the center of the row and look east. The 17 stones form a slight curve, not random, not accidental, but deliberate, like seats in an amphitheater, or like points laid out along a measured arc. At the eastern end of the row, where the curve reaches its highest point, one stone stands taller than the others. 3 meters, maybe 3.5. The name has been chiseled off, not weathered away, but actively removed. You can still see the tool marks where someone worked to erase it. The base of this stone is different too, larger, thicker, and at the center of its top surface, instead of 4 circular depressions, there is a single rectangular slot, roughly 15 centimeters long, 5 centimeters wide, and at least 10 centimeters deep. The slot is empty now, but the inner walls show faint traces of copper oxidation. Whatever was mounted here contained metal, conductive metal, and someone, at some point, decided it could not remain. One anomaly is a curiosity. 2 anomalies feel like a weird coincidence. But 17 identical monuments arranged in a clean geometric pattern, with features that serve no memorial purpose, this isn't coincidence. This is a system. And now the question changes. It's no longer, what are these stones? It's, what were they connected to? And does this pattern exist anywhere else? The answer comes 3,000 miles away. In a churchyard outside Manchester, England, where another row of oversized monuments sits waiting facing the exact same direction. Manchester, England, November 2017. A retired mechanical engineer named David Ashworth visits St. Michael's churchyard to photograph his grandmother's grave. He's done this every year since she died in 1994. The path is familiar, the stones are familiar, the ritual is familiar, but this time he brings a new camera, higher resolution, better zoom, and when he reviews the photos that evening, he notices something he has walked past for 23 years without truly seeing. Behind his grandmother's modest headstone, a simple granite slab, knee-high, engraved with her name and a line from Psalms, stands a row of monuments that don't belong. They're too tall, too thick, too exact. Ashworth counts 11 of them. Each stands between 2 and 3 meters high. Each features a base with 4 circular depressions arranged in a square. Each shows faint traces of metal staining around the top platform. He measures the spacing between the depressions on the nearest stone, 31 centimeters, exactly. The same measurement as the stones in Pennsylvania, the same pattern, the same repeatable precision. 3,000 miles apart, 2 different countries, 2 different sets of burial records, and the same kind of engineering. Now, before we go further, we need to stop and address the obvious, because there is an easy answer to all of this, a comfortable answer, the kind of answer that lets you close the tab and go back to your day without that strange, heavy feeling in your chest. The easy answer goes like this. Victorian-era families loved grand monuments. Death was public. Wealthy industrialists competed to build the biggest, most elaborate memorials. Stone was cheap in quarry regions. Skilled labor was available, and fashion demanded size, weight, and permanence. So, these oversized tombstones are simply the product of a bygone era's vanity. Nothing more, nothing less. This explanation appears in academic writing on 19th century funerary architecture. It's taught in university courses. It's repeated by tour guides at historic cemeteries from Boston to Birmingham. And for most cases, it's probably true. Wealthy families did build enormous monuments. The Victorian era did turn grief into ceremony. Stone could be affordable, labor could be found. All of that is documented. All of that is real. So why doesn't it explain what we're seeing? The first problem is cost. A monument of the size we're discussing, 2 to 4 meters tall, weighing 1 to 4 tons, required serious resources. Quarrying, transport, skilled carving, installation with heavy equipment. In 1880s Pittsburgh, a monument like the Whitmore stone would cost between $600 and $1,000. Adjusted for inflation, that lands around $20,000 to $30,000 today. James Whitmore was a laborer earning roughly $400 per year. Eleanor Marsh, according to the single census record that mentions her name, worked as a seamstress. Annual income, approximately $150. Thomas Garrett appears in no records at all. These were not wealthy industrialists. These were not railroad barons or steel magnates. These were ordinary people, or at least people presented as ordinary, buried beneath monuments that should have been financially impossible. Someone else paid. But who? And why? The second problem is design. Victorian funerary catalogs from the 1870s through the 1900s show hundreds of monument styles: obelisks, draped urns, weeping angels, Celtic crosses, classical columns. None of them feature bolt patterns. None of them include threaded mounting holes. None of them need flat surfaces ground to the kind of tolerance you expect from a workshop. These details serve no decorative purpose. A grieving widow does not request precise drill points. A morning sun does not specify 31-centimeter spacing for a square pattern of depressions, but an engineer would. The third problem is repetition. Fashion explains variety. Different families, different tastes, different ways of remembering, but the stones in Pennsylvania share identical specifications. The stones in Manchester share identical specifications, and the stones in Pennsylvania and Manchester match each other. Identical. Across an ocean. Across decades. Fashion doesn't produce this kind of uniformity. Fashion produces trends, versions, local styles, small changes. This is something else. This is standardization. This is manufacturing. The easy answer wants to be true. It offers comfort, closure. A world where cemeteries are just cemeteries, old stones are just old stones, and history is exactly what the textbooks say it is. But the easy answer cannot explain why a laborer's grave holds a monument worth 2 years of wages. It cannot explain bolt patterns on tombstones. It cannot explain the same engineering details appearing on 2 continents. The easy answer isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. And incomplete answers have a way of hiding the most important questions. The next piece of evidence comes not from the stones themselves, but from above them. A photograph taken in 1891 showing a cemetery worker posing beside a monument. The monument is taller than the man by a full head and shoulders, and on top of it sits something that shouldn't be there. The photograph surfaces in 2019, buried inside the digitized archives of the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. It's labeled simply, Cemetery Workers, Allegheny County, 1891. No location specified, no names listed. Just a catalog number and a faded stamp from the library's preservation department. The image shows 3 men standing in a row. They wear work clothes, heavy boots, canvas trousers, suspenders over collarless shirts. Their faces are serious, the way faces often are in photographs from that era, when exposures took long seconds and smiling meant blur. Behind them stands a monument. The stone rises well above the tallest worker's head. Based on the average male height in 1891, roughly 5 feet, 6 inches, or about 168 centimeters, the monument measures approximately 2.5 meters. Maybe more. The base is thick, rectangular, familiar. But it's the top of the monument that stops you cold. Because sitting on the flat platform, the same platform that on modern stones shows only an empty threaded hole, is an object. Spherical, metallic, roughly the size of a human head, maybe slightly larger. The sphere appears to be mounted on a short cylindrical pedestal. Around its equator runs a band of some kind, possibly decorative, possibly functional. The photograph's resolution is too low to confirm the material or read any markings. But the sphere is there, clearly, unmistakably. And in every photograph of these monuments, taken after 1920, the spheres are gone. The Carnegie Library has no record of who donated this photograph, or when it entered the collection. The catalog entry lists only the date of digitization, March 14, 2019, and the name of the technician who scanned it. A request for the original print, submitted by an independent researcher in 2021, was denied. The library claimed the physical photograph could not be located. A follow-up request in 2022 received the same response. The original has vanished. Only the digital scan remains. So, what was the sphere? The first instinct is decorative, a finial, an ornamental cap. Victorian monuments often featured elaborate toppers, urns, crosses, angels, flames. But spheres of this size and apparent material are rare in funerary catalogs. Metal spheres are rarer still. The weight alone would require real structural support, exactly the kind of support provided by thick granite bases and flat, prepared mounting surfaces. The second possibility is functional. In the late 19th century, cemeteries served purposes beyond burial. They were public parks, social gathering spaces, sites of civic pride. Some featured elaborate landscaping, fountains, even early electrical lighting. Could the spheres have been part of an early lighting system? Gas lamps? Arc lights? The theory has a certain logic. It explains the metal construction, the mounting hardware, and the uniform placement. It even explains why the spheres were later removed. Technology changes, maintenance costs rise, old systems get stripped out, but it doesn't explain the silence. Cemetery records from Allegheny County make no mention of lighting installations in the sections where these monuments stand. No work orders, no maintenance logs, no budget allocations for gas or electrical service. If these spheres were lamps, they were lamps that no one paid for, no one maintained, and no one remembered installing. More troubling still, the 1891 photograph shows the sphere in daylight. The workers pose in full sun, no evidence of wiring, no visible gas pipes, no infrastructure at all beyond the stone and the sphere itself. A lamp without fuel, a light without a source. There is a third possibility, one that researchers tend to mention only in private, in forums and group chats where people speak more freely than they can in an academic paper. What if the spheres were not decoration and not illumination? What if they were receivers? The late 19th century saw rapid development in electromagnetic technology, Tesla's experiments, Marconi's early radio work. The growing idea that energy and information could be carried through open air, through resonance, through frequency, through invisible fields. A network of metal spheres mounted on stone pedestals, arranged in precise geometric patterns, oriented in the same direction. Such a system could, in theory, interact with electromagnetic fields, could receive, could transmit, could resonate. This is speculation. It has to be stated clearly. No document confirms it. No blueprint survives. No engineer's notebook describes a cemetery system like this. But the photograph exists. The spheres existed. And someone, at some point between 1891 and 1920, decided every single one of them needed to disappear. The photograph from Pittsburgh is not unique. About 3 months after its discovery, a researcher in Leipzig, Germany, uncovers a similar image in a municipal archive. Different cemetery, different country, same era. The monument in the German photograph stands slightly taller, nearly 3 meters. The base shows the same 4 circular depressions, and on top, mounted to a flat platform, sits a sphere. Same size, same placement, the same strange way it catches the light, as if it's meant to be noticed. 2 photographs, 2 continents, 1 repeating pattern. The dead are supposed to stay buried. But these monuments, these bases, these platforms, these empty mounting holes suggest something else was buried too. Not a body, an idea. And ideas, unlike bodies, have a way of resurfacing. Leipzig, Germany. Winter, 1889. The Südfriedhof Cemetery opened that year, designed to serve a growing city's dead. The plans called for wide avenues, ornamental trees, and a clean grid of burial plots organized by district and social class. What the plans did not call for was the row of 17 monuments installed along the cemetery's eastern boundary before the first official burial took place. The monuments appear in the earliest site photographs, dated November 1889. Construction crews pose in the foreground. Behind them, already standing, already darkened, as if they had been there for years. 17 oversized stones form a gentle curve, facing east-northeast. The official opening ceremony occurred in March 1890. The dedication speech, reprinted in a local newspaper, makes no mention of the eastern monuments. Neither does the architectural registry. Neither does the City Planning Commission's final approval document. 17 stones, fully installed, completely undocumented, as if they were always meant to be unseen on paper. A German architectural student named Lucas Brenner discovered the discrepancy in 2018 while researching 19th century cemetery design for his thesis. He requested access to the original site plans held in the Leipzig City Archive. The plans showed the eastern boundary as empty grassland, no monuments, no graves, no infrastructure of any kind. Brenner then requested the construction photographs from the same archive. The photographs showed the monuments already standing. When Brenner asked the archivist to explain the contradiction, he received a short, careful reply. The photographs may have been misfiled. The site plans represent the official record. He submitted a follow-up question asking which record was accurate, the plans or the photographs. The archive did not respond. The Leipzig monuments share every major characteristic of their American and British counterparts. Height, 2 to 3 meters. Base thickness, 30 to 40 centimeters. 4 circular depressions arranged in a square, spaced exactly 31 centimeters apart, flat mounting platforms at the apex. Threaded holes, now empty. Faint traces of copper oxidation around the mounting surfaces, and the inscriptions name individuals who leave no trace. No birth certificates in Leipzig's civil registry, no death certificates, no family plots, no descendants, no living relatives who remember the names. 17 ghosts buried beneath monuments that cost more than a factory worker's annual salary. The pattern holds. Brenner expanded his search. He contacted cemetery administrators across Germany, asking about oversized monuments with unusual structural features. Most did not respond. Those who did offered the same kind of answer in different words. We have no records matching your description, but Brenner had learned what anyone learns in an archive sooner or later. The official channel isn't always the real channel. He posted his findings on online forums dedicated to architectural anomalies. Within weeks, he received photographs from amateur researchers in Frankfurt, Munich, Hamburg, and Cologne. Each photograph showed the same thing. Oversized monuments, flat, prepared bases, bolt patterns, empty mounting platforms. And in 3 of the photographs, taken before 1915, the platforms were not empty. The objects varied slightly in shape. One appeared spherical, like the Pittsburgh example. Another looked more cylindrical, with a flared base. A third was harder to identify, maybe conical, maybe damaged, maybe half removed at the moment the photograph was taken. But all 3 shared the same placement, the same mounting orientation, the same relationship to the stone beneath, and all 3 were gone by 1920. Brenner created a map. He plotted every confirmed sighting of an oversized cemetery monument with engineering features, bolt patterns, prepared surfaces, mounting holes, the same repeatable measurements: Pittsburgh, Manchester, Leipzig, Frankfurt, Munich, Hamburg, Cologne. Then he added unconfirmed reports from researchers in other countries, photographs too blurry to verify, oral accounts from cemetery workers. Rumors passed through genealogy forums and local history groups. Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, Edinburgh, Birmingham, Brussels, Vienna, Prague. The map filled slowly, then faster still. By the time Brenner finished, he had documented over 200 sites across 3 continents, all featuring the same design language, all clustering inside the same 60-year window, 1860 to 1920, and then abruptly, nothing. After 1920, no new monuments of this type appear anywhere. The design vanishes from catalogs, from records, and from the way people even talk about cemeteries. 60 years of construction, thousands of tons of granite, hundreds of precision mounting platforms. Then silence. A pattern this large doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't rise from fashion, coincidence, or a local tradition that just happened to repeat across oceans. A pattern this large requires coordination, resources, intent. Someone built these monuments. Someone installed the objects on top. Someone kept the specifications tight because a system only works if it stays a system. And then, somewhere between 1915 and 1920, someone decided the system needed to end. The objects came down. The paper trail thinned. The names became untraceable, but the stones remained. Too heavy to move, too expensive to smash, too solid to erase quietly. They remained still waiting in silent rows, holding their empty platforms toward the sky. The question is no longer whether the pattern exists. The photographs already answer that. The question now is what the pattern was for. What purpose demanded this kind of precision, this kind of scale, and this kind of silence? And the only way to chase that answer is to stop staring at individual stones and start measuring them as a system. A system requires specifications. If these monuments were built to work together, they were built to standards, and standards can be measured. In the spring of 2021, a loose network of independent researchers began coordinating their efforts through encrypted group chats and shared document folders. No formal organization, no funding, just a common obsession and a willingness to spend weekends in forgotten cemeteries with measuring tapes, cameras, and notebooks. They called themselves the Survey Group. They never met in person. Most never learned each other's real names. But they developed a methodology. The first task was establishing a field checklist, a set of measurements that could be taken quickly, consistently, and without attracting attention from groundskeepers or cemetery officials. The checklist contained 12 items. 1. Overall height, measured from ground level to the highest point of the remaining monument. 2. Base dimensions, length, width, and thickness. 3. Stone type, identified by color, grain pattern, and estimated density. 4. Tool marks, evidence of hand chiseling versus machine cutting. 5. Circular depressions if present diameter, depth, and spacing between centers. 6. Rectangular slots if present length, width, and depth. 7. Threaded holes diameter, thread pitch if determinable, and evidence of material residue. 8. Metal staining location, color, and estimated coverage area. 9. Orientation compass heading of the monument's primary face. 10. Geometric relationship to adjacent monuments, spacing, alignment, and curvature of rows. 11. Inscription details, name, dates, and any additional text or symbols. 12. Documentary status, whether the monument appears in official cemetery records. Each researcher received the checklist in a shared document. Each committed to surveying at least 5 monuments per month. Each uploaded their findings to a central database accessible only to group members. The first results arrived within weeks. By July of 2021, the database contained measurements from over 300 monuments across 11 countries. The sample was imperfect. Some researchers had better equipment, some had more access, some were more meticulous than others. But the patterns were undeniable. 87% of surveyed monuments showed base thicknesses between 30 and 45 centimeters. 92% featured at least one circular depression or threaded hole. 78% displayed evidence of metal staining consistent with copper or bronze oxidation. And 100%, every single monument in the database faced a compass heading between 60 and 80 degrees, east-northeast, without exception. Orientation is significant. Gravestones traditionally face east for religious reasons. Christian burial customs dictate that the dead should face the rising sun, ready to greet Christ at the second coming. Jewish traditions place the feet toward Jerusalem. Islamic graves orient toward Mecca, but these monuments do not face due east. They do not face Jerusalem or Mecca. They face a bearing of approximately 70 degrees, consistently, across continents, across decades. 70 degrees east of north points toward nothing of obvious religious significance. No holy city, no sacred mountain, no pilgrimage site, but it does point towards something else. In 1884, an international conference in Washington, D.C., established the prime meridian at Greenwich, England. This decision standardized global navigation, cartography, and timekeeping. A bearing of 70 degrees from the central coordinates of Leipzig points almost directly toward Greenwich. A bearing of 70 degrees from the central coordinates of Pittsburgh points almost directly toward Greenwich. A bearing of 70 degrees from the central coordinates of Manchester points almost directly toward Greenwich. The monuments face a single point on Earth, the point where time begins. Coincidence remains possible. A single shared orientation could reflect nothing more than surveying conventions or plot layouts determined by road access. But the survey group found another pattern that coincidence cannot explain: spacing. The distance between adjacent monuments in a row varies slightly from site to site, terrain, property boundaries, and later burials all introduce irregularities. But when researchers calculated the average spacing at each location, a number kept recurring: 314 centimeters, plus or minus 5. 314, the first 3 digits of pi. One researcher dismissed this as numerology. Another called it pareidolia, the human tendency to find patterns and randomness. A third pointed out that 314 centimeters is simply a convenient distance for visual spacing, close to the length of a human body at rest. But a fourth researcher, a retired electrical engineer from Chicago, noted something else. 314 centimeters is almost exactly one wavelength of a frequency near 95 megahertz, a frequency in the low VHF band, a frequency that, in the late 19th century, no one should have known how to use. The measurements accumulated, The patterns deepened. The questions multiplied. But measurements alone cannot explain purpose. Numbers describe a system. They do not reveal what the system was designed to do. For that, the survey group needed a theory. And the theory began with a simple question. What if these stones were never meant to honor the dead at all? The idea sounds absurd at first. Gravestones are gravestones. They mark the dead. They comfort the living. They serve memory, not machinery. But the survey group's data refused to fit this simple explanation. Machined surfaces, bolt patterns, threaded mounting holes, uniform orientation toward a single point on Earth, spacing that corresponded to electromagnetic wavelengths. These are not the features of memorials. These are the features of infrastructure. A mechanical engineer from Detroit named Marcus Webb proposed the first formal hypothesis in August of 2021. Webb had spent 32 years designing mounting systems for industrial equipment, turbines, generators, broadcast antennas. He knew what a structural base looked like when it was built to hold something heavy, something precise, something that needed to remain perfectly stable under vibration or wind load. The cemetery monuments, he argued, were not tombstones repurposed as bases. They were bases disguised as tombstones. The granite provided mass essential for dampening vibration. The machined surfaces provided alignment essential for equipment that needed precise positioning. The bolt patterns provided attachment points essential for securing heavy objects against weather and movement. And the inscriptions provided camouflage. A stone with a name and a date looks like a grave. No one questions it, no one measures it. No one asks why a laborer's memorial weighs 3 tons, or why it faces exactly 70 degrees east of north. The perfect hiding place, Webb wrote, is one that nobody thinks to search. But hiding what? Webb's hypothesis described the bases. It did not describe what sat on top of them. The spheres in the old photographs offered the only clue. Metal, reflective, mounted on short pedestals at the apex of each monument. Webb consulted with colleagues who specialized in antenna design. Their assessment was cautious but intriguing. A metal sphere mounted on a stone pedestal, they explained, would function as a crude capacitor. It could store electrical charge. It could discharge that charge into the surrounding air under the right conditions. And if multiple spheres were arranged in a network, properly spaced and properly grounded, they could interact with electromagnetic fields in ways that 19th century science was only beginning to understand. Could receive, could transmit, could resonate. The word kept appearing, resonate. Resonance is not magic, it is physics. Every object has a natural frequency, a rate of vibration at which it absorbs energy most efficiently. Strike a tuning fork and it hums at 440 Hz. Send a radio signal at the right frequency and an antenna converts it to sound. The survey group's spacing data suggested a resonant frequency near 95 MHz, low VHF, a band used today for FM radio and aircraft communication. In 1890, no commercial technology operated at this frequency. Marconi's first radio experiments were still 5 years away. Tesla's demonstrations of wireless power transmission were considered circus tricks by mainstream scientists. But someone was building infrastructure. Someone was installing metal spheres on stone bases across 3 continents, spacing them at precise intervals, orienting them toward a common reference point. Someone knew. The survey group did not claim to have answers. They had measurements. They had photographs. They had a hypothesis that explained the physical evidence better than Victorian vanity or catalog fashion. But they also had gaps. The spheres were gone. The records were missing. The names on the stones led nowhere. Whatever system once existed had been deliberately dismantled. Not abandoned, dismantled. The difference matters. Abandoned infrastructure decays slowly. Dismantled infrastructure disappears fast. The question shifted. No longer what were these built for, but who took them apart and why. The answer lay not in the stones themselves, but in what was missing from them. Removal leaves traces. No matter how careful, no matter how thorough, the act of taking something away creates evidence of its absence. The survey group knew this. So they stopped looking for what was there and started documenting what was gone. The first pattern emerged from the mounting platforms. Every oversized monument in the database featured a flat surface at its apex, a platform designed to hold something. Most platforms showed a single threaded hole at the center, typically 12 to 15 millimeters in diameter. Some showed 4 smaller holes arranged in a square pattern. A few showed both. but none of the holes contained anything. No bolts, no studs, no remnants of whatever hardware once secured the spheres in place. This absence was itself significant. Iron and steel corrode, bronze and copper oxidize, but they do not vanish. A bolt left in a threaded hole for a century would leave residue, rust, staining, verdigris deposits, metallite fragments wedged in the threads. The holes were clean, not weathered clean, not eroded clean, cleaned deliberately. Recently enough that no new corrosion had accumulated in the empty threads. Someone had removed the mounting hardware, and someone had made sure nothing remained to identify what the hardware once held. The second pattern emerged from the fractures. Many monuments showed damage at the apex, chips, cracks, breaks that exposed raw stone beneath the weathered surface. The survey group initially attributed this to age, vandalism, or falling tree limbs. But the damage followed a pattern. 73% of fractures occurred at the same location, the junction between the mounting platform and the vertical body of the monument, the precise point where a heavy object, forcibly removed, would exert maximum leverage. The breaks were not random. They were consistent with prying. Someone had used tools, crowbars, levers, perhaps mechanical jacks, to detach the spheres from their bases, and in many cases, the stone had cracked under the strain. The third pattern emerged from the ground. A researcher in Philadelphia noticed shallow depressions in the soil around several monuments. Rectangular shapes, approximately 40 by 60 centimeters, positioned 1 to 2 meters from each base. She recognized the shapes, equipment footprints, the kind left by ladders, scaffolding, or portable lifting devices. The depressions had partially filled with decades of leaf litter and sediment, but beneath the organic layer, the soil was compacted, pressed flat by significant weight over an extended period. Someone had brought heavy equipment to these sites, not once, but repeatedly. The compaction patterns suggested multiple visits, multiple operations, multiple objects removed over time. The timing remained elusive. Cemetery records offered no help. Maintenance logs from the relevant periods 1915 to 1925 were incomplete at best, missing entirely at worst. But newspaper archives provided fragments. A brief notice in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette from March of 1918 mentioned municipal workers removing obsolete fixtures from Allegheny Cemetery grounds. No further details. No explanation of what the fixtures were or why they had become obsolete. A similar notice appeared in the Manchester Guardian from September of 1919. Clearance of decommissioned memorial ornaments underway at Street. Michael's Churchyard. Decommissioned. The word implied official action, authorized removal, sanctioned erasure. The survey group assembled a timeline. The removals appeared to cluster in a narrow window. 1917 to 1922, the years immediately following the First World War, a period of chaos, reconstruction, metal shortages, government requisitions. A perfect cover for dismantling something that was never supposed to exist. The spheres were gone. The hardware was gone. The records were gone, but the stones remained, and the stones remembered. Not in words, in geometry, in orientation, in the precise spacing that someone had calculated long before wireless communication had a name. The stones remembered. But memory without context is just noise. The survey group had measurements. They had photographs. They had a timeline of removal. What they lacked was geography, an understanding of why these monuments appeared where they did. A researcher in Edinburgh named Fiona Gallagher changed that. Gallagher worked as an urban planning consultant. She spent her professional life reading maps, zoning documents, infrastructure overlays, utility corridors, transportation networks. She understood how cities grew and why certain locations mattered more than others. In October of 2021, she began plotting the survey group's confirmed sites onto historical maps from the 1880s and 1890s. Not modern maps. Period maps, the kind that showed what existed when the monuments were first installed. The correlation appeared within hours. 84% of confirmed monument sites sat within 800 meters of a major infrastructure node from the late 19th century. Rail stations, river ports, telegraph offices, early electrical substations, municipal waterworks. The remaining 16% sat near structures that no longer existed, buildings demolished, lines decommissioned, facilities abandoned and erased from modern maps. But on period documents, the pattern held. Every cluster of oversized monuments appeared near something important, something that moved energy, information, or resources. Gallagher refined her analysis. She focused on the 17 stone rows, the largest clusters, the most uniform configurations, the sites with the clearest evidence of coordinated installation. Every single one sat within 400 meters of a documented telegraph relay station. Every single one. Telegraph technology dominated long-distance communication from the 1840s through the early 20th century. Copper wires carried electrical pulses across continents. Relay stations amplified weak signals and passed them along to the next node in the network. The system required infrastructure, poles, wires, power sources, and operators trained technicians who manned each station around the clock. By 1890, the telegraph network had grown into the most sophisticated communication system the world had ever seen. It connected cities, nations, empires. It transmitted financial data, military orders, personal messages. It was the internet of its era, and it ran on electricity. Gallagher's discovery raised an uncomfortable question. If the cemetery monuments were part of a network of receivers, transmitters, resonators, what were they communicating with? The spacing data suggested electromagnetic interaction at VHF frequencies, but VHF transmission requires power, significant power. More than a passive metal sphere on a stone pedestal could generate on its own, unless the spheres were not generating, unless they were receiving. The telegraph network pulsed with electrical current 24 hours a day. Every transmission created electromagnetic fields that radiated outward from the wires, diminishing with distance but never disappearing entirely. A properly tuned receiver, positioned within range of a telegraph line, could theoretically harvest energy from those fields. Not much, but enough. Enough to resonate, enough to transmit a response, enough to participate in a network that no one had documented because no one knew it existed. The survey group debated Gallagher's hypothesis for weeks. Some found it compelling, others dismissed it as speculation dressed in technical language, but no one could deny the geography. The monuments clustered near telegraph infrastructure. The timing of their removal coincided with the telegraph's decline, replaced by telephone, then radio, then technologies that operated on different frequencies entirely. When the telegraph network died, the cemetery network died with it, or was killed with it. The pattern had grown too large to ignore, too consistent to explain as coincidence, too precise to dismiss as Victorian fashion. But patterns, no matter how compelling, do not answer the most human question of all. Who was buried beneath these stones? And did they ever exist at all? Numbers and patterns are seductive. They promise clarity. They suggest order beneath chaos. But cemeteries are not data sets. They are places where grief lives, where families buried children, parents, lovers, friends, where people knelt in the rain and wept for the ones who would never come home. The survey group had found a mystery, but in chasing it, they risked forgetting what cemeteries actually are. A researcher in Boston named Eleanor Chen reminded them. Chen had joined the group in September of 2021. She was not an engineer or an architect. She was a genealogist, a professional researcher who helped families trace their ancestry through historical records. Her first contribution to the group was a question. "These names on the stones," she wrote, "has anyone tried to find their families?" The answer was no. The group had focused on measurements, photographs, infrastructure correlations. The inscriptions were treated as data points, not identities. Chen began searching. The first name she investigated was Eleanor Marsh, died 1883, buried beneath one of the 17 monuments in the Pennsylvania Row. No birth certificate existed in Allegheny County, no death certificate either. The cemetery ledger listed her burial with the notation, "paid in full," no family contact. But Chen searched wider. In the 1880 federal census for adjacent Westmoreland County, she found an Eleanor Marsh, age 26, occupation listed as domestic servant, living in the household of a family named Thornton. The Thorntons owned a small manufacturing company that produced telegraph insulators. Chen found similar connections for 3 other names from the Pennsylvania Row. Thomas Garrett, no local records, but a man of the same name appeared in an 1878 employee roster for Western Union's Pittsburgh office. James Whitmore, the laborer whose monument started the investigation, appeared in an 1885 city directory as a cable technician, employed by a company called American Telegraph Supply. Margaret Holloway died 1887, was listed in an 1884 church registry as the wife of Frederick Holloway, a telegraph engineer who died 3 years before her. 4 names. 4 connections to the telegraph industry. Coincidence remained possible. Pittsburgh was a hub of industrial activity. Many residents worked in communication, transportation, manufacturing, but the pattern suggested something else. Chen proposed a theory. The names were real. The people existed, but they were not ordinary citizens who happened to be buried beneath unusual monuments. They were participants, workers in the telegraph industry who knew about the network, who helped build it, maintain it, operate it, and who were buried beneath its infrastructure when they died, their graves serving double duty as monuments and as nodes in a system their families may never have understood. The notation in the cemetery ledgers, "paid in full," no family contact, took on new meaning. Someone had paid for these burials. Someone with resources and authority. Someone who wanted the bodies placed in precise locations and the families kept at a distance. The workers became the network, in life and in death. This possibility reframes everything. The mystery is no longer just about technology or cover-ups. It is about people, about workers who may have been recruited into a system they did not fully understand, about families who lost loved ones and received no explanation, about grief that was managed, channeled, and ultimately erased. The survey group had treated the stones as machines. Chen reminded them that machines are built by human hands, and human hands belong to human beings with names, histories, and descendants who might still be searching for answers. But those answers depended on records, and records, as the group was about to discover, had a troubling habit of refusing to exist. Records are fragile things. Paper burns, ink fades, ledgers get lost, misfiled, discarded by clerks who see no value in keeping old pages. But records do not contradict themselves, not unless someone wants them to. The survey group had grown accustomed to missing documents, gaps in archives, pages cut from bindings, requests denied without explanation. What they found in November of 2021 was different, not an absence of records, a collision between them. The discovery began with a cemetery in northern England, a small churchyard in County Durham near the town of Consett. A local researcher named William Harding had documented a row of 11 oversized monuments along the churchyard's eastern wall. The stones matched every parameter in the survey group's checklist: height, base thickness, bolt patterns, orientation, spacing. Harding requested the burial register from the parish office. The register was intact, every page present, every entry legible. According to the register, the 11 plots along the eastern wall contained standard granite markers, headstones of modest dimensions, heights listed as 60 to 90 centimeters, weights estimated at 200 to 300 kilograms, standard stones, normal graves, ordinary burials. But Harding had photographs. He had measurements. He had stood beside those monuments with a tape measure and confirmed heights of 240 to 280 centimeters, weights estimated at 1,500 to 2,000 kilograms. The register described stones that did not exist. The stones that did exist appeared nowhere in the register. Harding checked the dates. According to his measurements, the monuments showed weathering consistent with installation in the 1870s or 1880s. The inscriptions listed death dates in that same range. The burial register covered the period from 1862 to 1928. Every burial in that window was documented. But the 11 names on the oversized monuments did not appear. Not misfiled, not abbreviated, not present at all. 11 people supposedly buried in this churchyard. 11 monuments standing for over a century, and no record that any of them had ever died. The survey group scrambled to cross-reference other sites. Within weeks, they found similar contradictions at 3 additional locations. A cemetery in suburban Philadelphia listed 12 plots as vacant, reserved for future use. Photographs showed those plots occupied by oversized monuments dated to 1891. A churchyard in Bavaria recorded a row of graves as containing simple wooden crosses, no permanent markers. The crosses were gone. Granite monuments stood in their place, weathered and stained, clearly present for decades. A burial ground in Massachusetts described an entire section as landscaped memorial garden, no interments. The section contained 9 oversized stones with names, dates, and the familiar bolt patterns. The records did not merely fail to document the monuments. They actively denied their existence. Someone had entered false information, not once, not in one location, but systematically across multiple sites, in multiple countries, over a span of decades. This required coordination, resources, authority, and it required motive. Cover-ups are usually simple. Remove the evidence, destroy the documents, let time do the rest. But this was different. This was replacement, creating a false record to stand in place of the true one, ensuring that anyone who searched would find exactly what they expected to find: normal graves, modest stones, ordinary deaths. The lie was not silence. The lie was noise. Carefully constructed noise designed to drown out the signal. The survey group faced a new reality. They were not investigating forgotten history. They were investigating erased history. History that someone had worked very hard to make invisible. The question was no longer what happened. The question was who had the power to rewrite the past and whether any trace of the truth remained. The investigation had run fast for months. Measurements, photographs, discoveries that arrived faster than the group could process them. Now it slowed, not because the researchers lost interest, because they reached the edge of what could be known. December of 2021. The survey group held its first real-time meeting, a video call across 9 time zones. 14 researchers, most still using pseudonyms, gathered to assess what they had actually proven. The list was shorter than any of them wanted to admit. They could prove the monuments existed. Photographs documented over 300 sites across 14 countries. They could prove the monuments shared unusual features. The measurements were consistent, replicable, precise. They could prove the monuments clustered near 19th century infrastructure. The geographic correlation was statistically significant. They could prove something had been removed from the mounting platforms. The tool marks, the fractures, the empty, threaded holes all pointed to deliberate disassembly. They could prove the historical records were incomplete or contradictory. The gaps and falsifications were documented at multiple sites, but they could not prove what the monuments were actually for. The spheres were gone. No surviving example had been located. No blueprint had surfaced. No engineer's notebook, no patent application, no corporate memo described a system matching what the group had found. The evidence pointed towards something, but something is not proof. Marcus Webb, the mechanical engineer who had first proposed the infrastructure hypothesis, spoke carefully during the call. "We have to be honest about what we don't know," he said. "We can measure the bases, we can document the removals, but we cannot reconstruct the system from its foundations alone. It's like finding 1,000 pedestals and trying to describe the statues that stood on them." The group fell silent. Webb continued, "That doesn't mean the investigation failed. It means we've reached the limit of physical evidence. Everything beyond this point is interpretation." The honest assessment was difficult to accept. Researchers had spent months traveling to cemeteries, measuring stones, photographing details, cross-referencing archives. They had found a pattern that no one else had documented. They had uncovered contradictions that suggested deliberate concealment. And now, they had to admit that the final answer might be permanently beyond reach. History is not a puzzle with all its pieces intact. Documents burn, witnesses die, memories fade into nothing. The 19th century feels recent. It is not. The people who built these monuments are gone. The people who removed the spheres are gone. The people who falsified the records are gone. They left stones, they left gaps, they left questions that may never find answers. Fiona Gallagher, the Edinburgh researcher who had discovered the infrastructure correlation, offered a different perspective. "Absence is also evidence," she said. "The effort to erase this, the false records, the coordinated removals, the missing pages that tells us something, you don't spend resources hiding nothing. Whatever this system was, it mattered enough to bury twice. Once in the ground, once in the archives." The group agreed to continue, not with the expectation of solving the mystery, but with the commitment to documenting what remained. Some questions persist because they deserve to be asked, even without answers, especially without answers. The stones were still standing, the patterns were still visible, and somewhere, perhaps, in an archive not yet searched or a photograph not yet digitized, one more piece of evidence was waiting. The group had accepted uncertainty. They had acknowledged the limits of what physical evidence could prove. But the pattern refused to disappear. Every new site confirmed it. Every new measurement reinforced it. The more researchers looked, the more the same features appeared stubbornly, persistently. across distances that should have made coordination impossible. In January of 2022, the survey group compiled what they called the core file: 3 case studies, 3 locations, 3 sets of evidence that represented the strongest, most thoroughly documented examples in their database. Case 1. Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. 17 monuments in a curved row, heights ranging from 210 to 320 centimeters, bases showing 4-point bolt patterns with 31 centimeter spacing, metal staining consistent with copper oxidation, orientation, 71 degrees east of north, distance to nearest documented telegraph relay station, 340 meters, inscription names traceable to telegraph industry employees, cemetery records listing the section as standard markers only. Case 2. Consett, County Durham, England. 11 monuments along the eastern churchyard wall, heights ranging from 240 to 280 centimeters, identical bolt patterns, identical orientation 70 degrees east of north, distance to nearest telegraph infrastructure, 410 meters, burial register describing the plots as containing modest headstones of 60 to 90 centimeters, photographs proving the register was false. Case 3. Leipzig, Südfriedhof, Germany. 17 monuments along the eastern cemetery boundary, heights ranging from 230 to 310 centimeters, 4-point bolt patterns with 31 centimeter spacing, orientation, 69 degrees east of north, monuments present in construction, photographs from 1889 before the cemetery officially opened, no mention in architectural plans, city planning documents, or dedication records, 3 countries, 3 languages, 3 separate administrative systems, and the same specifications, down to the centimeter. The survey group calculated the probability of this occurring by chance. The numbers were vanishingly small, the bolt spacing alone 31 centimeters. Repeated at every confirmed site would require explanation even if nothing else aligned. But everything aligned. Height ranges, base thicknesses, orientation headings, proximity to telegraph infrastructure, time window of installation, time window of removal. A pattern this consistent does not emerge from independent decisions. It emerges from a plan. The core file circulated quietly. Researchers shared it with trusted contacts, academics, journalists, documentary producers who might have interest and resources to push the investigation further. Most recipients did not respond. A few responded with skepticism. Victorian funerary customs, regional stone-cutting traditions, coincidental design choices that only appeared coordinated when viewed through the lens of confirmation bias. The survey group had heard these objections before. They had addressed them in the documentation. The objections did not account for the precision, the repetition, the geographic spread, the timing of removals, or the falsified records. But objections are easier to repeat than to answer. And easy objections have a way of closing conversations. One recipient responded differently. A retired archivist from the British National Archives. She had spent 40 years processing government documents from the 19th and early 20th centuries. She had seen things disappear. She knew how records were managed, manipulated, and sometimes erased. Her message was brief. Your pattern is real. I've seen the gaps. I know where some of them lead. But you're looking at the wrong archives. The answers aren't in cemetery records. They're in engineering files, military files, patent applications that were never published. She offered a name, a single name, a starting point. The name was Harold Vance Ashford. The archivist provided no context, no biography, just the name and a suggestion. Search the British patent records from 1875 to 1895. The survey group began searching. Ashford appeared in 3 patent applications, all filed between 1881 and 1887, all marked with a stamp that most researchers had never seen before. Reviewed not for public registry. The patents had been filed, they had been reviewed, and they had been removed from public access before publication. This was unusual. Patent systems exist to make inventions public. An inventor trades disclosure for protection, the right to exclude others from making the invention for a limited period. Suppressing a patent defeats the entire purpose. But suppressed patents existed. They still exist. Governments withhold applications that touch on national security, military technology, or strategic infrastructure. Ashford's patents had been suppressed. and they had remained suppressed for over a century. The survey group could not access the patent contents directly. The files remained classified under provisions that had never been updated or reviewed, but they could access peripheral documents. A letter from Ashford to the British General Post Office, dated March of 1884, referenced the installation of receiving apparatus at designated memorial sites throughout the northern counties. A requisition form from the Royal Engineers, dated November of 1886, listed granite pedestals, specification A7 for signal relay purposes, with a delivery address matching a cemetery outside Manchester. A memorandum from the War Office, dated February of 1892, discussed the decommissioning of experimental communication infrastructure installed during the previous decade. The documents never stated what the infrastructure did. They never described the apparatus in technical detail, but they confirmed that something had been built, something had been installed in cemeteries, and something had been deliberately removed. The survey group compiled the peripheral evidence and attempted to reconstruct what Ashford had invented. The most conservative interpretation, a passive signal relay system. Telegraph networks required repeater stations to boost signals over long distances. These stations needed operators, power sources, maintenance. They were expensive and vulnerable. A passive relay, one that required no power and no operators, would have been revolutionary. Metal spheres, properly tuned, could theoretically capture electromagnetic energy from nearby telegraph lines and re-radiate it at a slightly different frequency. A network of such spheres could extend signal range without additional infrastructure costs. The cemetery locations made sense under this theory. Cemeteries were stable. They did not get redeveloped. They did not attract attention, and they provided a reason for large stone structures that no one would question. The second interpretation was more ambitious. A wireless communication system. Ashford's work predated Marconi's famous demonstrations by nearly a decade. If Ashford had discovered principles of wireless transmission independently, and if the British government had recognized the military implications, the technology might have been classified immediately. The spheres could have been transmitters, receivers, nodes in a network that operated outside the wired telegraph system entirely. This would explain the suppression. This would explain the coordinated removal. This would explain why the records were not merely lost, but actively falsified. A technology too powerful to share, too dangerous to leave standing, too important to acknowledge. Both interpretations remained speculative. The primary documents were still classified. Ashford himself had vanished from historical records after 1893. No death certificate, no obituary, no further correspondence. But the peripheral evidence was real. The patents existed. The letters existed. The memoranda existed. Someone had built this. Someone had hidden it. And someone had decided that no one should ever know. The investigation had become something larger than anyone expected. What began as curiosity about oversized tombstones had uncovered suppressed patents, falsified records, and a network that stretched across continents. The survey group had documented more than they ever imagined finding. But documentation is not resolution. And facts, no matter how compelling, do not satisfy the part of us that needs meaning. In March of 2022, Eleanor Chen, the genealogist who had traced the Telegraph workers' names, posted a message to the group that shifted the conversation. "I keep thinking about the families," she wrote. "Not the technology, not the cover-up, the families. The people who buried their loved ones and never knew what was underneath. The children who visited those graves and never understood why the stones were so large." She continued, "We've been treating this as a mystery to solve, but maybe it's also a grief to witness. Someone lost a father, a mother, a sister. They stood in front of these monuments and mourned, and all along, the stone was doing something else, serving another purpose, belonging to someone else." The group fell quiet. For days, no one posted measurements or photographs. No one debated hypotheses or challenged interpretations. They sat with what Chen had named. The monuments were infrastructure. The evidence supported this conclusively. But they were also graves. Real people with real names had been buried beneath them. Real families had placed flowers on the bases. Real tears had fallen on the granite. The two truths existed simultaneously. Neither canceled the other. This is what makes the cemetery mystery different from other historical puzzles. A suppressed technology is an intellectual curiosity. A falsified record is a bureaucratic crime. But a grave that serves two masters, memory and machinery, is something else entirely. It is a violation of trust. Families believed they were honoring the dead. They were also, unknowingly, participating in a system designed by people who never asked permission. Their grief was used. Their sacred spaces were appropriated. And when the system was dismantled, no one told them. No one apologized. No one explained. The survey group could not undo this. They could not restore what had been taken from families who never knew it was missing. But they could witness it. They could document the names. They could trace the genealogies. They could acknowledge that behind every data point was a human life brief, fragile, meaningful in ways that no infrastructure could capture. The monuments remain standing, in Pennsylvania, in England, in Germany, in dozens of other locations where researchers have not yet looked. They guard their secrets. The spheres are gone. The records are buried. The patents are sealed. But the stones themselves remember. Not in words, not in explanations, in weight, in silence, in the patient endurance of granite that has outlasted every attempt to erase its purpose. Some mysteries are never solved. They become instead invitations to look more carefully, to question more deeply, to remember that history is not a fixed narrative but a living argument between what was recorded and what actually happened. The monuments are part of that argument now. They have been seen, they have been measured, they have been named. Whatever else they were built for, they have become something new, witnesses, to a past that someone wanted us to forget. Dusk again. The same cemetery outside Pittsburgh where this story began. The iron fence still needs painting. The grass still grows long between the rows. The old section still waits at the northern edge, separated from the newer graves by a shallow ditch that fills with rainwater every spring. Nothing has changed. And everything has changed. A hand reaches out and touches the Whitmore stone. The granite is cold. Rougher than it looks, a century of weather has opened tiny pores in the surface, giving it a texture like frozen cloth. The inscription is still legible. James Whitmore, 1847 to 1891, a laborer who earned $400 a year and was buried beneath a monument worth $2,000. The hand traces the edge of the flat platform at the top. Fingers find the threaded hole at the center, 12 millimeters in diameter, corroded but still precise. The hole is empty. Whatever it once held is gone. But the stone remembers. 17 monuments stand in the row behind this one. 17 names. 17 lives reduced to inscriptions that tell almost nothing. Eleanor Marsh, seamstress, died 1883. Thomas Garrett, telegraph worker, died 1879. Margaret Holloway, wife of a telegraph engineer, died 1887. People who lived, worked, loved, suffered, and died in a world that no longer exists. People who were buried beneath stones that served purposes they may never have understood. People who became, in death, part of something larger than themselves. Were they willing participants? Did they know what the monuments would become? Did they consent to having their graves transformed into nodes in a network that would be erased from history? The stones do not say. The records do not say. No one alive can say. The sun drops below the tree line. Shadows lengthen across the grass. The monuments catch the last light at an angle that makes the metal staining glow faintly copper green against granite gray. For a moment, if you squint, you can almost see the spheres. Almost imagine them sitting on their platforms, catching the same light, humming at a frequency no human ear could detect. Almost. History is not what happened. History is what survived. Documents that were not burned. Photographs that were not lost. Stones that were too heavy to move. The cemetery monuments survived because they were massive. Because dismantling them would have cost more than leaving them in place. Because stone, unlike metal, has no salvage value. They were abandoned, not because they were unimportant, but because they were inconvenient. And now they stand as evidence of their own erasure, proof that something existed, proof that something was removed, proof that someone, at some point, decided the world should not remember. The hand lifts from the stone. The visitor steps back, looks once more at the row of monuments, and turns to leave. The cemetery fades into darkness. The stones remain. They have remained for over a century. They will remain for centuries more, patient, silent, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Maybe these monuments were never built for bodies. Maybe they were built for an idea, a vision of communication, of connection, of power transmitted through air and stone and metal, and maybe someone decided we were not ready to remember it. Not yet. The screen fades to black. A single line appears. The stones are still standing. The questions are still open.